I think in order to get started, I wanted to do a small quiz with you and ask you, what do all these things I will tell you now have in common? So we have an investigation into the murder of a health department official in South Africa, which was covered up. Fact number one. Covered up by local authorities. We have a 20-year-old self-made millionaire from Kenya who became rich by showcasing the life of the rich in Kenya. That's another fact. We have a middle-aged lady from Nigeria who turned energy expert with her own dedicated team, created one of the first clean energy hubs in Nigeria, and is now an acknowledged partner by the US Embassy and international organizations. Anybody have an idea already? Except that they are all based in Africa. Shall I give you some more hints? Okay, let me tell you two more things. One of the top-ranking movies in Netflix in Kenya, with 18 million views, is about a romantic entanglement of two lovers in the background of parliamentary elections. Okay. And the final one, maybe 3 African journalists from widely read newspapers are traveling next week to Ukraine. The thing that connects them is the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. We are all involved in these projects. And I wanted to tell you about these cases so that you know how many different things we do in Africa. We don't do an investigation into a murder in South Africa, but we award a local journalism prize in Africa for local journalists who are uncovering the truth and to try to report on things, on developments which concern local communities, but also have, of course, a bigger meaning in society and in Africa. So when we look at the murder, for example, it's a thing about corruption, about cover-ups, and it's also a thing about rule of law and human rights, and about accountability, right? And if we look at the self-made millionaire who's doing films in Kenya, it's about startups, and we work with startups in Africa in order to support entrepreneurship, the market economy, and market competition, but also, of course, digitalization, which is very important, and which we don't have that much here yet in Germany, but hopefully we will have.
I have a question regarding the project of uncovering the truth, and you said that it's covered up by authorities in South Africa. So if you support the journalists to uncover the truth, would that not make you in a conflict with the local authorities there?
Well, we awarded the journalists the local journalism prize, and in South Africa you still have a very free press. So you know probably that you have the ANC ruling since apartheid broke apart, and that the society in South Africa is still generally very liberal, and you have a pluralistic press. And that's why these investigative reports are, of course, quite important. But with the cover-up, it's not easy, and for the journalist, of course, to do his work, and he received a lot of threats. That's true. We have the lady who's an energy expert now in Nigeria. So she's doing projects which are important to us regarding climate change. You know, in Germany we're very much concerned about this thing, and clean energy. We want to also support the partnership between Europe and Africa on transitioning to clean energy generation. And Africa is, of course, a continent with lots of potential over there. And we also still need a lot of help in getting clean energy to power our industry, which is still quite good, and we can only do that with clean energy, or that's what our goals are. We have the Netflix movie, which is of course about democracy. We financed this movie, and we co-wrote the script in order to appeal to a wider audience on how democracy and elections are important and relevant. Probably you know that last year in, I think October was the election in Kenya. There was a change of the president, and Kenya had a history of also violent incidents during elections. And so we aimed also with our project there to make people aware of the importance of getting elected or going to vote and going for clean elections. And instead of doing it like a documentary, which not everybody wants to watch, if it's 30 minutes long and quite boring, the director really decided to do a romance out of that. My wife, for example, she just loves only watching romantic movies. She doesn't like any thrillers. And then finally, we have next Monday 3 journalists coming from Nigeria and South Africa to travel with our support to Ukraine. Why do you think do they travel there? Do you know?
Where?
To Ukraine.
Ukraine?
Yeah, 3 African journalists, Nigeria and South Africa. Chief editors. Why do they travel to Ukraine?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't hear about.
Maybe it's because of the Russian interest on Africa. So
Yes.
they want to see, like, show also the other perspective in Africa about the war.
Yes. Maybe you know that in Africa there are many countries which are not supporting the Ukraine war, which are either neutral or rather sympathetic to Russia. Because of history, you know that the Western powers used to be the colonization powers of Africa. So there's a lot of, let's say, negative historic sentiment about that. And of course also with wars in Africa where there's a belief that, you know, the West never really cared about them. But now that we have a war in Europe, suddenly we want them to care. And also, of course, because Russia has traditionally quite good relations, and during the liberation struggles of the African continent, there were lots of African students studying in Moscow and in the Soviet Union, so there's a lot of also personal liability there. So we hope that the journalists, the chief editors, who have quite impactful newspaper outlets, will be able to, with their experiences they gather in Ukraine, go back and report on what they've seen, and try to put a little bit of a counterbalance to, let's say, disinformation campaigns or narratives which are sometimes nominated by Russia or by China, and they are then usually more sympathetic. So this is about freedom of speech, freedom of the media. This is also a project that we organize. I mean, we haven't talked about the Sahel, for example, where you probably know in Mali there's a big influence of Russia, a growing influence, and where European and Western powers are forced to leave now, even though it's a UN mission. We have a little bit the same challenge in Congo. So there are different things that we also deal with on the security side. We have, of course, migration challenges, which are interesting to us. And these are all projects that we are doing. And I wanted to give you a little bit of a snapshot so that you can then decide what you would like to ask me or comment on me. In Sub-Saharan Africa, we have 20 offices in many countries. And there we have usually one colleague from the headquarters here working with local staff to implement the projects we do. And sometimes we also do projects together with the European Union, financed by the European Union, or also coordinated with other organizations, especially with local organizations. We always try to have local partners on board, local politicians on board, from parliament or from the government, in order to get legitimacy and also to have more sustainability on these things. We are here working now also because generally we want to we are creating a network of like-minded people where we can have the opportunity to talk not only officially and diplomatically about solving problems that we have in common. For example, on climate change, we need the governments in Africa, the same as we need governments in Asia or in America, in order to try to find a way out of the climate crisis. But the same goes with wars or anything else, where we try to find a solution on how to negotiate. And the networks we create with politicians or young people who are becoming politicians, for example, are always very helpful. That's why we're doing also lots of scholarships in Africa and beyond. And Henri, for example, is a scholarship holder from KAS. And that's why we try to invest also in the youth. As you know, in Africa we have quite a young population. In Germany we have quite an old population, so I think it's very important for us also to keep track of what the young are aiming for and striving for, and not leave it up to other countries like China or Russia to try to educate them. I think that's it from my side. And please let me know what you think is interesting. I see a couple of colleagues are coming there soon. Just in time for the questions. Good morning. I just finished with my presentation, so you're ready for the questions?
So the strikes now.
No, actually questions and comments. So whoever wants to ask a question or a comment. You were first.
Yeah, you mentioned about colonial history, especially the fact that because of the colonial history in Africa, there is more like ambivalence between African nations and the former colonizers, and there's more sympathy with Russia. With the role of Konrad Adenauer Stiftung representing a certain part of the political spectrum in Germany, in another nation, what was the biggest challenge for you in terms of like reconnecting with the African nations and the citizens themselves? Because I do believe that in the Philippines we do have sense of like governance through democracy and governance. That's where we connect. But what is the greatest challenge for Konrad Adenauer to establish this connection and make sure that there is a working relationship between Germany and the nations in Africa?
I think you cannot generalize. Every country is very different, you know, and usually we work in a country by invitation of the government, so we need to regularly register our offices, and in that respect, of course, we see an interest by the government that we are working there, and at the same time a readiness to engage. For example, in Iran or North Korea, we don't have an office because they're not interested in us working with civil society and everything. So generally, I think that there's a readiness to engage in dialogue. Generally, I think Germany is recognized to be quite a, let's say, neutral international player with not a lot of, let's say, the will to impose something on it like the United States might be perceived. And in that way, I think that generally we have quite a good starting position. But Germany also used to have colonies in Africa, for example, Namibia. Well, we're talking about the genocide 100 years ago. And of course, that's a bit more difficult, and we have to be even more careful on how we work and how we engage with people on the ground. So a lot depends on the people who are working for us in the offices there and how sensible they are with the local customs and everything. And in some countries that's very easy because everybody loves Volkswagen, Mercedes, and German soccer. And in other countries it's a bit more difficult because we have a history which is not very easy. So I think this is a little bit like diplomatic work, but I think we have the possibility not only to engage with representatives from the ministry, like many diplomats must, but also go into the civil society and find people who are interested. Since we are the ones who can give funds, of course we become attractive to many people in countries which usually don't have the possibility, let's say journalists or NGOs to get funding. And with these local partners, of course, we have an easier time of engaging with society in general.
Thank you.
I just wanted to know if you are, as an organization, you are a private subject or you are dependent?
Well, we are actually funded by the government, and it was already a little bit mentioned here that we have foundations we are political foundations, so we're doing mostly political work. And that is because historically, after the Second World War, our foundations were created here in Germany in order to do lifelong learning for people in Germany. Because it was a lesson from the Second World War that we were all under the influence of the Hitler propaganda, and we all believed what Hitler was saying, generally speaking. And the idea was that if we had educational institutes like the foundation talking about politics even after school, people are much more aware of what's going on and to critically see developments which might be populistic, disinformation, and things like that. And out of that grew our international engagement as well, because we became a trade nation, trading a lot with other countries. And so for us it was also of interest to have connections not only via embassies and via economic or business representations, but also between civil society. That's why we came there. And this job we are doing is funded by the government, but it's funded also for all the other foundations who belong to different parties. We're the foundation which belongs to the CDU, which was under Angela Merkel for 16 years in government, and now we're in the opposition, and we share the ideals of the party of the CDU, but we're independent from it. So we're not financed by it, and we are not controlled by it, so theoretically we could criticize our party as much as we wanted. But of course we share the ideology and have the interest of moving forward. It's a very unique system to Germany. There are not so many other countries which have these kind of foundations. In the United States, you have the National Republican Institute, International Republican Institute, and National Democratic Institute. In the Netherlands, you have smaller foundations which are a little bit like this. You have the Westminster Foundation in the UK, for example, but they're all not like that thing we have in Germany. I think it is an advantage we have because we have a multitude of antennas of foreign policy when we are in a country, together with the embassies, with the chambers of commerce, with the economic business representations, with the Goethe Institute you might know. So this is very helpful. But of course it also shows a multitude of players there, which can be a bit confusing for people who don't know it. Yes?
So all the examples you gave are, from what I read, examples of trying to enter various spheres, you know, the newspapers, the public, through a movie, to influence the population there to align with the German, whatever, West line. What kind, and it sounds to me these are all unilateral actions towards influence. What kind of things do you do that are more in the interest, the true interest of the African nations?
I would call it entering, because we don't want to take over any country and we don't want to psychologically brainwash anybody in order to be a fan of Germany. But our mission ideals, that's why we're funded by the government, which is democratically elected, is democracy, the rule of law, and freedom. So we try to enter the country by promoting democracy, the rule of law, and freedom, market freedom, entrepreneurship. That's something else than trying to influence the thinking in the direction of, I don't know, against somebody else. We support players in different countries. For example, recently we had elections in Sierra Leone, where we try to motivate people to vote, like also in Kenya. Not for them to vote for a German-friendly government, but to go out and vote and make democracy alive. That's why I think it's a pretty different thing. And as I emphasized, almost every project we do with local partners. And we don't pay them and tell them what to do. Usually they come to us and say, we have certain projects which we would like to do together with you, and then we see, do we align on the goals we have or not? So if they say we want to support labor unions, negotiating for higher wages, this is rather something that might our sister foundation from the Social Democrats do. If they say we want to support entrepreneurship on a local level so that people get to do small businesses in villages, this is something that is interesting to us. If they say I need money to investigate corruption, this is very interesting to us. If we have, for example, the heads of the parliamentary committees on defense of the whole African continent, we finance a conference annually to get together and talk about security issues. Because we believe that the security in Africa is also relevant for our stability here in Europe. I'm not saying that everything we do is very successful and in the end we get what we want, but I think we try to have partners who understand us better and who know that Germans are, let's say, straightforward in a way. Not always easy, of course. And there's a lot of convincing, because I was working in Russia, for example, some time ago, and they couldn't understand why we, as a German NGO, are working for non-profit in Russia, in their country. Why do we work there without getting anything directly? So we must be spies. So it's not easy to engage with everybody. and you have to explain a lot depending also on the situation. And since we are a foundation which doesn't exist in many other countries, we sometimes have a lot of suspicions and everything. And then people can choose if they want to work with us or not. But in many countries we also have to open up our books to our activities, to the government. And in that respect, we are quite transparent. Our annual report is online in English and German. Everybody can look into it, even the Chinese and the North Koreans if they want. So in that respect, we try to be an example. Great. Please go ahead.
Hello, thanks for your facts and your presentation. Renato from São Paulo, Brazil. So connecting to what my colleague has asked, and connecting to the democracy as the main goal of KAS, right? What we see now in Africa today, such a large continent with more than 50 countries, and when we see political freedom in those 50 countries, it can vary a lot. I mean, there are democracies, there are anocracies, like they say, and also autocracies. Do you think that KAS interests are more, you get more called by democracies, and you also want to be more involved with the real democracies of Africa? Does that happen? Because Africa, the political right spectrum can vary a lot. So do you favor, do you prioritize democracies in Africa?
I wouldn't say so.
Okay.
But it really depends. We have some countries in which we don't work because it's difficult. The Central African Republic, for example, we don't work, and in other countries we don't have an office. But we have an office in Zimbabwe, for example, which is of course a very difficult country to do anything. And now we have elections coming up, and I was just recently talking to my colleague who's leading the office there. And it's very difficult to do anything with civil society, for example. So it really depends. So I would say rather we work because we thrive on the challenges and we want to promote democracy. So we have a reason to go to these places. We have also a country in Venezuela, which is always getting worse and worse and not better. And so this is something that is in our focus as well. Okay. And when you're talking about the right-wing politicians, generally I would say that, as much as I don't know all African countries. Usually there's a domination by rather the liberation movements who are more on the socialist side. And it's true that we don't have a lot of right-wing or center-right governments there, or center-right parties. And but this is not for us a factor to say, okay, we go into that country if we have a party there or not. But if there is one which seems to be legitimate in a way, we try to work with them and see if there's potential or not. For example, now in South Africa, we have the elections coming up next year. And we have a couple of new parties who want to challenge the ANC and also want to challenge, let's say, the center-right spectrum. And we try to engage with them first carefully because we don't know, is it just one guy who wants to be president of a party and wants to get into parliament to enjoy his life? Or does he really want to change something? And so I think we have quite a lot of experience in judging that and always re-evaluating it as well.
Yeah, I wanted to ask whether sometimes you feel like you're painted with the same brush of the West is bad, that's what they did to us in the past. Mostly local people, if they don't know much about Germany, they associate directly with the Western countries who did this and that. And then it's like you're pushed in a situation to justify yourself and always make sure that nothing is happening.
I would say that generally that doesn't happen so much. I think in many countries you have a lot of openness. If you talk about the politicians and the press, that can of course be if they, fear about their status quo or think that, we encourage competition where they're very happy to live on, on government funds and stuff like that, But I think the experiences from our colleagues is that if you go into the villages or into other cities, everybody's always very engaged in coming to the seminars we do, not only from us, also from other people. For example, we do a lot of trainings for women in business or also in politics. How do women enter politics? Or how do young people engage in politics? And usually what we find when we go into Eastern Congo, or if we go to, Northern Ghana, that lots of people want to see that because they don't have the opportunity to talk about these things. They have possibly school education until, I don't know, 10th grade or something. And then they never had, or often they never had something else where they can engage and talk about, let's say, their local grievances, their local achievements and stuff like that. And I think this is where we try to engage with them and try to create something where we have a common interest. So if we talk about Germany and health politics and I don't know, digitalization and so on, that's of course something that maybe in Africa not everywhere people can relate to. So we try to find something like the role of women, which, you know, with 50% everywhere worldwide, it's very important that they get more power. And we find a lot of enthusiasm. And negativity towards Germany or Western people is less. But I think generally you could say that sometimes you're afraid of things you don't know, and then if you meet people, then your fear subsides. And I think generally this is the case wherever you are, in Germany or in Africa. Some other questions? I still have 15 minutes with you.
How many offices do you have around?
We have around 110 offices. Where are you from?
From Prague.
Ah, okay. Yeah, we have an office there too. Yeah, so many different countries you're from, yes. But of course, in Prague we work completely differently than we do in Harare, for example.
And joined the educational program with the Egyptian universities.
Egyptian University.
Yeah, I am teaching at the British University in Egypt. I'm a professor there. That's why I'm asking.
Ah, okay. We have a bit of a history with Egypt. 10 years ago, when the Arab Spring happened, our director and local staff were arrested and put into prison.
Yeah, it was common at that time.
And you maybe know about it. And they were in prison for a while. And Chancellor Merkel had to negotiate in order to free them. And then, of course, we evacuated them.
Mm-hmm.
And since then, we don't have an office there anymore because it's still Mr. Sisi who has his own ideas.
Yeah.
But recently they have been more open and we're thinking about opening a local office, which means that we have local staff working there and a German coordinating from Tunisia or somewhere. But so, because Egypt is a very relevant country in the north, it is also our interest to work there. But now we are also in the process, as you see, even in Germany, our funding goes down a little bit because our economy is going down and we have the war and inflation and so on. So we also have to see where we get the funding from. And we of course only do it if we know that we will have funding for a sustainable future and not only for 1 year.
Okay. Maybe you have hopes to come again because it's such a fruitful society to work with, even under His Excellency President Sisi.
I think it's very interesting for us to do that, and it's very concrete that we are coming there already with local staff.
I hope so.
So hopefully maybe also in your university you will hear about us then.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it will be in your good benefit, inshallah.
Thank you.
Okay.
But of course, if we have, like, let's say 5 people usually working in one country, or 10 maximum with local staff, and we have a country in Nigeria of 250 million, of course not everybody can hear of us. We can do the greatest movie in Kenya, that's true, but we don't always do that, or we don't manage to do that everywhere. So it really depends, and for us it's good if we know that relevant politicians know about us, and maybe business organizations and civil society organizations, and that's good. Now that we have, for example, a Nigerian editor-in-chief coming and traveling to Ukraine, this is also, of course, something that he might remember in the future when it comes again to Germany or to the Ukraine war. So in the end, it's a little bit about, you do a lot of work, but you don't see the results right away.
Yeah.
If you're a
Have to
gardener,
wait.
you see the results in half a year, right? But with us, building democracy or civil society is very hard. In Prague, there was a really big development a generation ago, and in other countries it takes longer. And I think what's getting more important for us is also to understand much more what's going on in the countries where we work, in China or in Africa, in Nigeria, in Kenya, where you have a lot of startups. Because in Germany we're quite content on how we live. We're in Central Europe, we are a rich country, everything's working more or less well, and we're used to that. But we don't realize how fast things are changing in Asia, and how young the generation in Africa is, and how much easier they can handle digital tools as we do. And to also, one of those jobs we do is to teach our politicians here what's going on over there, and to make them aware of trends, we should not leave passers-by. And that's not so easy. Because we have an older society where older people are usually more for safety, stability, and predictability. And they don't want to have radical changes. They don't want to suddenly do everything on their cell phone. They want to do, the documents they can fill out, and they go to the mailbox, and then they put them in the mailbox, and 10 days later they get a reply. And we are all impatient, the young people, right? And the young people want much more things happening right now, and it creates much more transparency. And so this is also one of the jobs we do. So we bring things which we hear there into here and tell them, and hopefully they listen, what they need to do or what to be aware of. And it's not easy.
Do you work in China?
We also have offices in Beijing and in Shanghai. And I know the director there very well, and for him it's become a hardship post. Is somebody from China here?
Today. Not today.
You're possible.
Ah, yeah. Because especially over the last couple of years, the pandemic has helped lots of governments to become even more in control if they wanted to, right? And I hear that in China you have now face recognition software everywhere you want to go. And that of course controls you a lot. Your cell phone of course is never really safe. And so this is really something if you want to promote, let's say, civil society dialogue, and it's not always a fan of Xi Jinping, it can be difficult.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, so...
I just want to comment on what Marika said a while ago, and also to testify, I would say, to what you said about the how non-intrusive the work of the Stiftungen in the countries like KAS in Africa or even the Philippines. Before working for the German embassy, I didn't have any idea about the foundations. And then I realized we have now 5 German political foundations working in the Philippines, and how much they actually do work a lot in German-Philippine bilateral relations. And I was so impressed because you don't know. You don't know that they're working there. But once you're in the community or in the zone, it's, oh my God, this is how much they're actually doing. And I just want to comment on that that's how I see it when I was working for the German embassy.
Thanks for the free advertisement. Well, I mean, we're doing a lot, but it doesn't always say, and that's what I want to say, that we're always effective. We're doing a lot, we're putting a lot of money in, doesn't mean that we're effective. We try to evaluate our work every 3 years, and we try to see, do we reach goals which are, let's say, reachable or not? And there we have to be very honest with us, and we spend a lot of money on this. We spend a lot of money on development policy in Africa. I'm not really sure that our development aid is very effective. So, we do a lot, and we hope, and I see with projects I did, that you can achieve stuff, but it's always, you have to be realistic. Is somebody here?
Yeah, I was thinking with 110 offices in the world, there must be so many stories of challenge and success, and I'm wondering if you might be able to share with us one of the stories that inspires you the most in some of the work that you've done.
I was already telling some stories when we started, but I also have some stories, unfortunately only in French this time, about the African dream. I think some of you are French speaking, right?
Yeah.
So please feel free and take this later on. It's hard. I mean, I think generally the stories I like the most is working with young people, where we give scholarships, because in many countries you see that also young people get to important responsible positions already quite quickly. And if you have a scholarship holder who you have supported for 1 or 2 years, not only financially, but usually we do like monthly meetings, getting together like you do here now with meeting other institutions and so on, and you keep in touch, and then he makes a career in getting into parliament, for example, and being the head of the international committee. It is of course always helpful if, for example, then we have a certain challenge of, let's say, immigration and migration issues in Greece. I was working in Greece. And then you have the European border where all the refugees were coming from Turkey, and you try to find new ways of engaging and finding solutions. So this is very helpful, of course, Or I was speaking about a film project we did in Kenya about a romantic couple and an entanglement in the context of parliamentary elections in Kenya, and it was viewed by 80 million people. It's on Netflix. and it is about actually democracy and going to vote and having transparency and accountability. So it's not always about clicks, and it's not always about being famous, but about the human-to-human impact you have, and the network you can actually call up if you need it. It's always nice that people say thank you very much for the sponsorship and for giving us this nice dinner tonight. But if you call them up 1 year later and you realize they are open for you to help solve a problem, or arrange with you a meeting because you have a friend or a member of parliament from Germany coming to, I don't know, for example, to Namibia in order to discuss things on green hydrogen, then it is something that is successful. But it's hard to pin down exactly what the success is. So in a way you have to be an idealist because you never see the results really quickly.
I have a question about, from your conversation with our colleague from Egypt here, about when you responded that, you know, it's important to have a longevity of a project realistically, so that not just start something for a year and then finish, which is absolutely, I totally agree with. My question is more about the German government and how it works and how the funding goes to all these Stiftungen. So that, is there some kind of protection mechanism so that these projects can be more long-term,
Yes.
rather than depending on the elections
Yes.
and how it goes?
Yeah. For example, we have 5, 6 relevant parties in parliament right now, and all these parties, they have a foundation. And all these parties are funded by the government, but they are funded according to, let's say, a key which takes into account the average election success of the last 4 elections. So that means 4 times 4, 16 years, and you take the average. And in that respect, you know, if you have a piece of a pie, that, let's say the CDU, which was quite successful for the last couple of elections, gets quite a big chunk of the money, and the FDP, this is the Liberals, they get quite a small chunk. So this is something where we already know a little bit more or less what we can expect for the next year. But in order to plan longer, also we have a planning horizon of usually 3 years, where also the ministry which finances us guarantees us a minimum amount of money we get to implement in one country. Not to make it too complicated, but we have this like long-term commitment you have also with EU projects or with diplomatic projects, which is very regular. Yeah. Are you from Netherlands?
Kind of. My mom. Yes.
Oh, okay.
I'm from Italy.
From Italy too, okay. Because in the Netherlands, for example, you have the Eduardo Frei Stiftung. Did you ever hear of it? It's not that big, but it's also belonging to one of the political parties, the Christian party. Ah, yeah.
A question as well. In terms of friends and enemies, you said 110 offices around the world. How does the foundation decide, should we go to this country or this country? You would think enemies, actually, there's a bigger benefit. There's more of a need for the work of the Konrad Adenauer. On the other hand, it's very political in terms of deciding, is this an ally, is this... How are those decisions made?
Well, other than the Americans, we don't think of enemies so much.
Okay.
We think of business opportunities. Well, in a way, we are very harmonious people, as you know, and we still believe, and you've probably seen that during the Ukraine war, we still believe that peace is possible. I think that's one of our problems. We are not realistic enough for seeing that just because we have it nice in Europe, everybody else is enjoying his life too. I think it depends also a little bit on the interest of the government on how they want to do their foreign policy. For example, 10 years ago we had a protest in Moldova, which is a very small country neighboring Ukraine, about wanting to go into the European Union. And we realized back then that we didn't really have it on our radar so much, and they had quite a legitimate cause. It was also about Russian dominance, Russian influence, and then you have an occupied territory already there since the Cold War. And we actually put quite a lot of money, well, the government was engaging quite a lot with the democratic forces there, and we opened up an office there. We had another case where in Myanmar, for example, when there was the opening 10 years ago, we negotiated with the government and we opened an office over there. But now in the civil war 2 years ago, we had to evacuate because it was not possible anymore to operate. So it really depends, and especially with the enemies that say it's hard, they don't accept. In Iran, I would love to work in Iran, but the Iranians don't want us to come. So that's why we're not coming, and since we're not spies, we cannot go like this, you know. But generally I would say it has something to do with us being a trade nation. You know that we are the 4th biggest trade nation in the world. Everybody loves our products. And so of course it's also in our interest that to create goodwill. In a way we are also creating goodwill with the work we do. Not directly, but indirectly I would say that engaging with the people, telling them about Germany, about how we think, they understand us better and have less of prejudices and stuff. Again, not very tangible.
That's what you mentioned, Myanmar. Could you just add a few projects that you were working on?
On a project we were working on there.
I worked in Myanmar, so just
Actually there I can't tell you so much because with Myanmar I don't know that much. Yeah. I just know that we had an office working and a colleague working there, and I think it was 2 years ago when the violence broke out and there was another putsch and Aung San Suu Kyi was arrested, that we had to leave, and we are not able to operate there anymore. Also actually Pakistan, we had for many years offices in Pakistan, and I think for 2 or 3 years now they infringed upon our rights and freedom so much that we couldn't operate anymore and then we had to leave. In Afghanistan, until last August, we had an office, and of course we also evacuated like everybody else. So, yeah. So we are always talking about this, this is a very trendy term, shrinking spaces. I don't know if you heard about it probably. And this is of course something which we feel a lot, shrinking spaces of freedom. And they are in many countries happening, but sometimes they are also reversing. For example, Brazil, I would say maybe it's now more liberal than maybe a year ago, and in other countries maybe too.
I'm wondering how how the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung monitors the situation around the globe, because you have specialists for each region, and how do you develop a program worldwide? And also, do you have in mind that you at some point will also phase out programs in certain countries? So is this, do you get in and you see, let's see what's coming, you just, you know, start something, or do you already have a certain time horizon that you say, okay, we are planning to do this for 10 years or so, and because at the same time things are changing so quickly, yes? So not to miss out other regions where you might also possibly want to put any focus. So that's how to navigate this. So
yeah.
I'd like to hear this.
I think that's like with many countries, also with embassies or so on. We have long-term planning. And for example, if we go into a new country, we have to apply with the ministry to get funding. And that we cannot do by going for a coffee with the minister and asking him if he can give us $1 million. But we have to write a lot of papers, objectives, results, indicators on how we measure success, and only then we get in. And this is usually a long-term plan for, let's say, 10 years. Otherwise, we really wouldn't do it. We have EU projects where we are joining in or applying for, and they usually run only for 2 or 3 years. But they sometimes happen with the infrastructure we have on the ground, and sometimes we hire new people and we know that we only have a focus on a time horizon of 2 or 3 years. So that really depends. Yeah.
And how do you collect all the information about all these different countries and regions?
Well, this is
take
like
decisions where to put your focus.
I mean, this is organized, I would say, like many foreign ministries. So we have desk offices here in the headquarters who are receiving the information from our offices over there. So I'm a desk officer for Southern Africa, and I'm in touch with my colleagues who are heading the offices there regularly and find out what's happening. For example, now in South Africa with the elections, very interesting. In Zimbabwe, I have to take a focus on, and in other countries as well. So they are sending in reports. We have regular meetings where we talk about what's going on. And we have also strategy meetings and to see what are we planning for the next year. Does that sound realistic? But it's always focused just on one country usually. We have also regional programs. For example, we have a regional program on security in Western Africa and a regional program on security in Eastern Africa. And there, of course, we try to see regional trends, like for example, the Sahel problem, Sahel crisis right now. But yeah, the challenge is to collect the trends and the information and see what's relevant to feed into the headquarters and maybe then feed into political decision makers. So this is the idea that we have this two-way street. We not export, but we share our skills and our ideas about democracy in many countries, and we bring in the trend and the knowledge and national interests of other countries and try to work with that here with our foreign policy and domestic policy instruments. So it's a very complex thing, but I think many countries are doing it that way.
So when you look back, do you have the experience that you say, oh, we missed out certain countries in the past to establish any relationships, and or there was a blind spot, and how do we make sure in the future that we don't miss things? Because I think like if you have people who work there already, then you know the circumstances, because you have people reporting. But there's also other countries probably where how to evaluate what's going on there.
Well, with the 110 countries, we have the privilege of already being in many important countries.
Yeah.
You could say that definitely we missed out on the Afghanistan debacle, we missed out on the war in Ukraine, even though we had 2 offices over there, and we missed out on many things. But on the other hand, since we're not, let's say, profit-oriented, it's not so bad of maybe missing out. We realize if there's something which is going to develop for a long time, we are getting into a negotiation with the ministries to say we need to get in there in order to help German foreign policy. So I wouldn't say it's something like, oh, that's too bad, we missed out on that. And since we have, for example, after the fall of the Iron Curtain in Eastern Europe, we opened up offices very quickly. So I would say that we and the other foundations were very quick in reacting, or we opened an office in South Africa right after apartheid. So I think that in many ways you could say that we have been doing fine. But then again, I don't know very closely about Asia or South America, for example, if we missed out on a lot of things. You could always argue that you miss out on things.
And you just mentioned about your fellow foundations. I was wondering, what is your relationship with all the other German political foundations? Do you sometimes work together on certain projects, or are you completely independent from each other?
Well, we coordinate usually. That's important to understand who's working with what. But on the other hand, it's important that we have also our own profile. Let's say because the government is funding us, if they don't see a difference between us and other foundations, they say, why do we need them anymore? Then we stuff everything into the GIZ, who you probably know, our technical organization, and we don't need to fund the foundations anymore. So we try to have our own recognition, so to say. And like I mentioned, the thing with working with unions, that's rather traditionally, let's say, social democratic, and we are more working, let's say, with businesses, which is more, let's say, center-right or market-oriented. So I think that you got a pretty good overview. If you Google the African Dream, in KAS, K-A-S, you should find this publication online as well. And it's about success stories of selected start-uppers in Africa, and it's very fascinating because it's, for example, about a start-up who's running a blood bank in Nigeria and how they get it to the people who need it in Lagos, which is one of the biggest cities in the world, and there's absolute chaos in the city streets, and how they deliver the blood where they need it for transfusion and stuff like that. Or it's about a mining company in South Africa, which is created by a lady, and who's now running one of the biggest businesses in mining in South Africa. So it's actually quite a very, very interesting publication, and I encourage you to read it if you're talking about best cases or good experiences. And the good thing is we're in touch with those people. And for example, the Kenyan I talked about was the television on the Ridge. I just invited 3 weeks ago here to Berlin with three other African startups, and we were engaging with politicians here in order to make them aware how fast Africa can change and how much they are ahead in digitalization, for example. So there was a lot of fun to see that. So I thank you all for your interest and for your visit. If there are no more questions, then I don't know if you want to make pictures or take some of the publications. I have another one, Automation and the Future of Work in Sub-Saharan Africa, for the specialists among yourselves. And yeah, That's it.